What it comes down to is that my interpretation of my work is really immaterial. I mean, I'm not really a believer in art and music being institutionalized or put in galleries and stuff like that. I think art is something for the use of a public. It's for the public to interpret it and use it almost like a sustenance to life. So it's the interpretation of the listener or the viewer which is all important. Authorship is in question now.
Hello, space boy.
What Brian and I found that we were doing initially in March of '94, when we were looking for grist for the mill, is dealing with all the subjects that interested us at that time. For my part, it was things like the re-emergence of neo-paganism and ritual body art and fragmentation of society, which is an ongoing thing that I've never moved away from. That plus the odd lyric that I'd been writing over the last few months. And all these things sort of became the fodder for what we were doing. And once we started actually evolving the piece, we realized that we had formed some kind of narrative, loose, very loose, non-linear narrative with this small cast of characters. And there was a thread of a story that kept running into conflicts, like real life. There were no tidy endings, no tidy beginnings, and the whole thing was very messy. And we thought, well, that's as it should be, let's not clean it up. But it did give us the impression that this was an open-ended vehicle, that it would be, what a great thing it would be to keep working on these things right the way through to the end of the century and have more or less a kind of a diary ourselves in music and texture of what it felt like to be around at the end of the millennium. It would be so, wow, I mean, what an accomplishment, you know? And let's do it before anybody else does.
Same thing, same place.
By virtue of the fact that I'm getting older, has given me quite a scope on what I can draw from within my own catalogue of albums. I can take things from albums that I did 15, 20 years ago and taking something from, say, the 70s and putting it into the 90s. It's almost like the albums that I've done have become the palette that I can draw from. Each album is kind of a different colour. You know? I don't really have to go much to the outside at all for influence or a new inventive way of doing something. I just kind of look at my own stuff and utilize what I've done already. You know, it's there to be used.
There's a similarity in the sense of there's a kind of angst that was in the late 70s albums. There's the dysfunctional city from Diamond Dogs makes a kind of an appearance. There's the mythical beast in the character of the Diamond Dog, but which is now reformed as the Minotaur. These set, almost signature things that I've written about over the years that are recontextualized now that they're put into this current piece that I've done with Brian. It's kind of exciting getting them all to where they're all speaking different languages. It's like these people have been away and they come back and they're Italian or something. Or Italian, but actually in this case they're from New Jersey. New Jersey. When I was doing the characters in the early 70s, I think it was some problem for me about whether they were stage characters or recreating aspects of my life and taking it on stage, or whether the thing was evolving on stage and I was then pulling it back into real life. And now I think what I'm doing probably to protect my own sanity is that, in a way, it's a precaution, I guess. Instead of inventing just one character, I've invented about 7 or 8, and I think it enables me to retain the guise of an author, but at least I don't identify with them. They sort of remain plastic, malleable creations that I can probably go with and take somewhere else on further albums. So there's a sense of distance now, and I like being in the situation of, narrator, author. I think there's probably I'm more comfortable there than actually inventing and being any of the characters that I create.
Even though there's a very strong narrative and characters in this new piece, Outside, it really isn't what the album's about. The album is about atmosphere. It's about the sound of 1995. The narrative and the characters are really a kind of a skeleton. The content of the album is what's put on that skeleton, which is the musical texture. That's the flesh and the blood.
I don't think there's ever really been a time in the last 25 years making music and writing music that I haven't also painted. If I have any kind of a problem with the context of something, or if I come to a block and I can't go forwards anymore, I'll often revert back to the other medium. So often if the music side of things is bogged down and I've got to this kind of impasse, then I'll go and paint it. You don't come to the end of a painting, you come to a point where you know you have to stop. And I think the great artists know where to stop, and those of us that are kind of tagging on behind, sometimes we go just a bit too far and you destroy the whole thing. We don't do quite enough and it's a bit weak. That's what it's like being a visual artist.
16 measures of solo.
1989.
And then an additional 8 as a
Tin Machine Special.
And then we break
Was that the original?
Snare.
Because it was pretty much an experiment in its own time, in its own way, in its own nature. I think a Tin Machine probably embodies some of the best and some of the worst. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So of the work that I've done over the last 10 years anyway, it had extraordinary high points and some real downers. Which comes with the territory of experimentation. Not all of it works, but when it does work, it works really well. And again, it's a thing that Brian always uses when I get a bit timid about the work that I'm doing. He says, don't forget that in music you can crash your plane and walk away from it, that art really isn't that full of life-threatening situations. What Brian brings to a situation is a very sophisticated sense of analysis. He can look at something and gauge its import. He can examine a piece of music and find its real strengths and also its weaknesses, and he'll tend to frame a little piece in the middle and say that 10 minutes is really interesting, but the songs either side are a waste of time. and nothing's happening. But his conceptual abilities, that when he brings those into a work situation, are really a help to the creative aspects of what you're doing. A small, mobile, highly intelligent unit in a tweed jacket.
And then the next bit is, I am with Nay, hey. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I am with Nay, hey.
A lot of the recording situation for Brian and myself is sort of a what-if kind of situation. It's like there's a lot of play involved with what we do, and unless you have musicians who are completely in tune with that, it can produce great hostility in the studio, which is something that did happen in the late 70s when we worked together. A couple of the guys in our band at that time found what Brian and I wanted to do kind of stupid and childish, and I guess they were probably right, but it produces great results. And this time around, I purposely chose musicians who would feel at ease in a kind of a slightly humorous situation. Mike Garson, of course, is from the Aladdin Sane period of my work, and was always a really out there, fairly eccentric musician. I had Erdal Kizilcay, who's a Turkish musician who I've worked with over the last 5 years, playing bass and keyboards. Reeves Gabrels from Tin Machine. Sterling Campbell was the drummer, who was also the drummer on Black Tie, White Noise, and subsequently is now working with Soul Asylum, so I'm afraid we've lost him for the tour. And we had Carlos Alomar, who worked almost continuously with me, off and on, since 1973.
Oh, Patty, I think I've lost my way. What a fantastic death act. Patty, what a fantastic death act.
The song itself, Heart's Filthy Lesson, because it's made up of juxtapositions and fragments of information, doesn't have a straightforward, coherent message to it. In fact, none of the album has any message. It's really a compression of information. It's just information, make of it what you will. But I guess my input into Heart's Filthy Lesson is that the filthy lesson in question is the fact that life is finite. That realization, when it comes usually later in life, can either be really a daunting prospect, or it makes things a lot clearer. Unfortunately for me, I see it without a sense of unease, and for me, knowing that I've got a finite length of time on Earth actually clarifies things and makes me feel quite buoyant.
So it makes me a 4-5-6 split on both cameras. Okay, stand by, slate up, and play back. Camera rolling.
A showreel is like a tape that shows a director's work, what he's been doing over the last couple of years. And the one that really struck me was the one by Sam Bayer. There was a sort of a kind of a painterly way of the way he sort of distresses everything that he does. You know, things are like broken down, rooms are very kind of have an aged, stained quality to them. And when I got to meet him, a lot of it became clear why his stuff looks like it does. He was a painter for 8 years, and he brings that sensibility to his work. So the very loose storyline was a group of young artists creating a Minotaur out of cast human parts and a bull's head. And I provided the sort of Greek chorus to it all. This is my flesh and blood. This is what I could have been. I haven't toured since 1990, so I guess it's a big deal for me. I think the adventure of it for me is I'm not doing any so-called hits. I'm wary of saying that it's got lots of obscure songs in it, but the truth of the matter is that they're more obscure than anything else. Things like, well, My Death is a song that I haven't done since 1973. I think it was the last time I did it. Andy Warhol I'm doing, which I've never done on stage. Same with things like Teenage Wildlife, The Man Who Sold the World. And that sort of coupled with the material from the Outside album, for me is produced. They kind of work together so well, those particular pieces. There's sort of somehow kind of a thread that makes sense through it all.
And you all looks a screen, hanging on my wall. And you all silver screen, can't tell them apart at all.
And needless to say, I'm really excited about the idea of working with Trent Reznor and 9 Inch Nails. So far, talking with him, I think he seems very focused and seems to have not dissimilar idea of what it is he wants from his music as myself. I think we should be able to collaborate quite well. I think what's going to be nice is working together on stage, and we're going to do some songs together, some of his and some of mine, which I think really is going to be very exciting. I can't remember who said it, I wish I could, but something to the effect of that religion is for people who believe in hell, and spirituality is for people who've already been there. And, you know, I got that going for me, so that's nice.